Hello, and welcome to my channel and this new series that I call Journey to Med, where I'm trying my very hardest to help prospective medical applicants achieve their dreams and their goals by getting into medical school. So today I will be making a video all about the Ucat that will help you fully understand what is this exam and give you all of the resources and tips and tricks to really crack the code on this exam. And like always, to try and help you and inform you to the best of my abilities, I have created a list of questions that I'll be answering today, such as what is the Ucat, how long does it take to prepare, what are the key dates that you need to remember, what are the best resources to prepare, and so much more. So if this interests you, please stick around, watch the video, and click on the like button so I know that you enjoyed this type of content. And like always, if any of your questions has not been answered here, please leave a comment down below or contact me through DMs and I'll try my very best to answer them. So now that all of this is finally out of the way, I can start answering some questions. So the first question that I have is, what is the Ucat and who requires it? So the Ucat stands for the University Clinical Aptitude Test. It's a 2-hour-long test, it's multiple choice, and it's also computer-based. So it's an entry exam that most medical schools and dentistry schools in the UK will actually use as an entry requirement for their course. Then the next question is, when is the exam? So actually the Ucat's testing schedule usually opens in early July and closes in early October. And so during that time, there are exams almost every single day and multiple times a day. So this means that you have a lot of choice and you have to choose wisely when you want to sit the exam based on who you are, how you study, how long you need to study, if you prefer having a morning session or an afternoon session. So all of these different components need to be taken into account when you choose the date of your exam. So the next question is, when should you book your exam? So as mentioned previously, there are a lot of different dates available to you. But when should you actually book this exam? And for me, what I would say is that you should book the exam on the day that the registration for the exam opens, because this will allow you to have all the choice you want and make sure that the date you want to take your exam is not fully booked. For instance, I think I booked my exam just a little bit late, and the date that I wanted to take my exam was fully booked. Thankfully, I was able to take my exam maybe 3 days later, so it wasn't that big of a difference. But please book your exam date as early as possible. It's just going to avoid any stress for you. Also, I think it's also important to note that you can change and reschedule your exam date. So for instance, if your exam date was booked on the 1st of September, but you realize on the 15th of August that you're not going to be ready, it's going to be too much pressure and you need to push back your date of a week or two, on the 15th of August, go reschedule your date directly to make sure that there's still slots open. So my next question is, which universities use the Ucat? So as mentioned in my BMAT versus Ucat video that you can actually watch just after this one, the Ucat actually has 30 different schools that use it. And I will put a photo of all of the different schools that use it so you can pause to read them, or you can go in the link in the description below to find the list. So the next question is, what to do before exam day? So personally, what I would say is that the first thing you need to do is to prepare everything you're going to need. So prepare your bag, make sure that you have your ID, make sure that you have the paper that proves that you're doing the exam on that day at that time. Make sure that you've prepared your ETA and you know exactly how long it's going to take you to get there and how you're going to get there. Make sure that you've also prepared your water bottle and anything that you would need to make sure that you're comfortable on exam day. My next question is, what to do on exam day? I think the first and the most important thing that you need to do on exam day is you need to stay calm. The last thing you want to happen is that you've prepared for this exam, okay? You've revised, you've done all of the practice questions that you could, and then you arrive in front of that computer and you just panic, and all of the precious preparation that you've done just goes out the window. And that's not what you want to happen. So you really need to make sure that you stay calm and you do everything before you enter that exam and on the morning of that exam to make sure that you're calm. So what I would suggest is that just to remind yourself that you've worked hard enough. You've done the best that you could, and it would have not been possible for you to do anything better. Just realize that you've worked as hard as you could, and I think that's one thing that helped me stay calm. Another thing is that you should also remember and visualize in your head maybe when you're going to the exam, or when you're just waking up, or when you're getting ready. All of the different strategies that you've put into place to actually answer the questions for each different section. And then I think that the last thing that I would suggest that you do on exam day is to remember how much time you have for each section, how many questions there are in each section, and how much time you have per question. This will just allow you to remember when you're in front of that computer exactly how to pace yourself and if you're going too slowly or too quickly. And then the next question that I have, which is directly linked to the two previous ones, is what to do after the exam. So the first thing I would say, once you finish the exam and the computer screen shows you basically you're done, go get your exam results, what I would say is that you need just take a moment and realize that you've done it. All of the preparation, all of the months of preparation, all of the stress is done. You've done the exam. The dice are thrown. You can't do anything else now. And then just stand up and go get your results, look at your results, and regardless of what the result is, just celebrate. Just be proud of yourself that you've done the exam. And then once you've over celebrating or getting over the fact that maybe you didn't get the score that you wanted to get, then you can use your results to start and tailor and look into which universities you want to apply to based on your result exams. And also a video will be arriving on how to choose your universities for medicine. Okay, so now that we've actually looked at maybe the more basic or introductory questions for the Ucat, we can now dive into more specific questions regarding this exam. So the first question that I have is, what are the different sections of this test? So this test actually has 5 different sections compared to the BMAT that has only 3. So the first section is verbal reasoning. It lasts for 21 minutes. Then there's decision making. It lasts for 31 minutes. There's quantitative reasoning. It lasts for 24 minutes. Abstract reasoning, 13 minutes. And then the last section, situational judgment, which lasts for 26 minutes. If anybody actually decides to add up all of these different times for each of these sections, you will see that it only adds up to 115 minutes. And the 5 extra minutes are actually minutes that the Ucat adds just before each section, which gives you the time to actually recalibrate and focus your energy on the section that's coming, and also forget the previous section. If something went wrong in the previous section, use that minute to fully focus on the next section and just forget everything that happened before, so you can actually get the score you want to get. So the next question is, how important is the Ucat in my application? So this question is actually pretty difficult to answer because it really depends on which university you apply to. As I mentioned previously, there's 30 different Ucat universities in the UK. So every university will actually use the Ucat a bit differently. Some universities will weigh it very, very heavily, while other universities won't weigh it as much. However, as a rule of thumb, you need to remember that if you're applying to medicine, you have the grades. You have done the work experience that was required from you. And so one of the only factors that can differentiate you from another applicant is your score on the Ucat or your score on the BMAT. And so in that sense, it plays a very, very important role. And so what I would do, and what I would suggest that you do, is that you consider your Ucat and this entry exam as a passport or an entry ticket to your interview invitation. I mean, it's not called an entry exam for nothing. Because the last thing you want to do is to meet all of the requirements, the grades, the work experience, the personal statement, but just miss the cutoff score. And the only way that you can be above the cutoff score is to put and weigh the Ucat very heavily and work very hard to get the grades you need. Okay, so then the next question, which I think kind of goes with the previous question, is what grades do you actually need to get an interview offer with the Ucat? So again, this depends a lot on the universities, and I can't give you a very, very precise answer because every single university will have different ways that they will actually use the Ucat. So some universities will have a very strict cutoff score. If you have above this cutoff, then you have an interview, provided that everything else in your application is good. Other universities will say that you have to be in the first 30% of all test takers to have an interview. And other universities will use a completely different approach. What they actually will do is that they will attribute points to every single section of your application. So the personal statement, the Ucat, the work experience, etc. And so if you have a very high mark in your Ucat, This means that you'll have a high score for this section of their evaluation. And then the highest ranking applicants will receive an interview. And if you want to know more of how this system works, I think that Leicester University uses this approach. But I think that what I just told you there doesn't really answer what grades do you need to get an interview. And so to answer this, I think we can look at statistics from the 2 previous years, so 2018 and 2019, to get kind of a rough idea of what grades you should try to be exceeding or what grades you should try to be aiming for, depending on which universities you're applying to. So we can see from the statistics that the average score for Section 1 in 2019 was 565 and 567 in 2018. For Section 2, it was 618 and 624. For Section 3, it was 662 and 658. For Section 4, it was 638 and 637. And so the total for 2019 was 2,483, and in 2018 it was 2,485. So this gives you a rough idea of what is the average scores for each section for the last 2 years. So for the last section of the Ucat, the situational judgment part is graded differently. I've mentioned this in my previous video, BMAT versus Ucat. And you can see from the statistics that most people will get a band 2. I think that something else that's also pretty important to mention here is that you can also look at the deciles to understand what kind of grades you should be aiming for. So we can see from in 2019 that you had to have a grade or a total score above 2,480 to be in the first 50% of all test takers. However, with the statistics, we can also see that scoring in a certain decile, and by extension potentially getting into the school you want to get into, is usually a question of getting a few more questions right. So let me actually illustrate my point. The Ucat has a total of 233 questions. You are graded between 1,200 Ucat points to a total of 3,600 Ucat points. This means that the range of points that you're graded on is 2,400 Ucat points. Now, if we do a very simple calculation and we divide 2,400 by 233, we get about 10 Ucat points. So now if we look at how many points you need to move from one decile to another, we can see that it's usually between 60 to 70 Ucat points. And we can see this clearly between the 6th and the 7th decile, which are separated by 70 Ucat points. This means that to move from the 6th decile to the 7th decile, a test taker needs to have 7 additional correct answers. And this amounts to about 1 or 2 extra correct answers per section, which means that you need to practice the Ucat correctly and give it the time it needs, because it's only a question of a few extra additional questions that will give you and allow you to hit the cutoffs that you want. And if you don't practice enough, you might be in the opposite scenario where you're missing maybe just 7 questions to hit that cutoff, and you don't want to fall into that. So please, please, please practice your Ucat correctly, give it enough time, and just be very persistent and disciplined with it. So the next question is, when do you get your results and what are some key dates regarding the results? So you get your results on exam day. Once you're done, they just print the paper and they give it to you and they're like, here we go, here are your exam results. And so you have them directly. Then the key dates that you need to remember are one key date in mid-September and one key date in the first week or so of October. And what these key dates are is that the one in mid-September is when they release the interim results for the Ucat, meaning that they give you the average scores of all test takers for the first half of the examination session for that year. They give you all of the deciles for that year and what score you would need to be in the 5th decile, the 6th decile, etc. And then they also give you the percentage of how many people are in band 1, band 2, band 3, band 4 for situational judgment. That's a key document that you have pretty early on in your application process, where you're able to gauge your level and compare your level to other people and kind of tailor which universities you can apply to with your level. And then you can also compare if this year was maybe harder or easier than the previous years. Then the next date that you have is the date in early October, which is when they release the final results. And this is what universities will use to create their Ucat cutoff or to know exactly which grade corresponds to which decile. And so at that point, you know exactly where you stand and you can apply while knowing exactly kind of what are your chances of getting into the universities you're applying to. So if you have a UCAT score that's not as high as what you wanted, maybe aim for schools that wouldn't ask for a UCAT score that's high. And then the opposite around, if you have a really good UCAT score, then you can aim for schools that put a very heavy weight on the UCAT. Also, something to note that I've realized from the previous years is that there's a difference between the interim results and the final results. And so your decile will be pushed up by quite a bit when you move on to the final results. Because usually the first half of test takers will get higher grades than the second half of test takers for the UCAT. So my next question is, how long does it take to prepare the UCAT and when should you start? Again, this is a pretty difficult question to answer because we're all different and we all learn at different speeds. However, as an average, I would say that you would need somewhere between 2 to 3 months of loose revision, followed by 4 to 6 weeks of intense revision. In the loose revision part of your preparation for the exam, you would be understanding the structure of the exam, understanding the different question styles, understanding and learning the different strategies that you can use to tackle different types of question. And at that point, you should also be doing practice questions, but that are untimed. Then when you move to the intense portion of your preparation, you should be practicing a few hours every single day, doing some practice questions that are timed. You should be doing mocks and mini mocks, as well as keeping track of all of the mocks and mini mocks you do. So you are able to understand if you're improving, if you're not improving, and knowing exactly where you need to focus your effort. So the next question is, what was my workflow during the intense months of work? Okay, so what I would say first is that during my intense preparation, I worked 3 to 4 hours every single day. And for me, a typical day looked like this. I would do some questions on Medify or on the question banks from the Ucat consortium, and then I would look at the corrections and make sure that I fully understand what was the issue. For the questions, I would decide and kind of have a schedule of if I wanted to do decision making and abstract, if I wanted to do quantitative and situational judgment. I would usually just have 2 different sections that I would be working every single day. And these would depend, and I would choose them depending on how well or how badly I did on previous mocks on each section. I also would do, during my intense months, around 2 mocks a week. I did a mix of the Medify mocks as well as the mocks from the official Ucat resources. And I also kept track of my mock scores, which allowed me to keep track of on which sections I was improving on, which sections I was not improving on, which sections were my strong sections, and which sections needed more work. So for example, if we look at my Excel spreadsheet, you can see exactly how I was doing. So how I organized it was that I had a column for all of the mocks or diagnostic tests that I did, and then 1 column for each section of the test. I also had a color code of red needs more work, orange needs work, and green was good. And then I had like darker green, which was like very good. And so what I would do was that each time I did a mock, I would look at each score. Of course, I would look at all of the corrections and understand why I got it correct or why I got it wrong for each section, for each question, sorry. And then what I would do was that I would then write the scores in this spreadsheet and then decide if it was red, orange, or green. And this allowed me to see exactly where I was improving. So for example, for the first 3 mocks plus a diagnostic, you can see that my scores were pretty horrendous. They were not that good, but when you move down and to like the last mocks that I did, you can see that they were getting better and I was consistently improving, or at least maintaining a good score. Because with the Ucat, what you want to see is that you're always consistently hitting the same grade, and that can assure you that on the exam, you'll probably hit that same grade or even higher. Then at the bottom, I was also keeping track of all of the mini mocks that I was doing. And then you might also be interested in what results did I have. So I got a 560 in section 1, a 660 in section 2, a 700 in section 3, and an 800 in section 4, as well as a band 2 in section 5. Okay, so now the last question is probably the question that you've been waiting for a very long time, is what resources did I use for the Ucat? So I used a range of different resources to prepare for the Ucat. For the loose part, I was actually part of an academy that helped me understand what the Ucat was about, what were the different what were the different question types, how to approach the different questions, gave me tips They also gave me tips and some strategies to approach the questions. However, I do recognize that not everyone has access to an academy to help them prepare for the UCAT, but I do wholeheartedly believe that the tutorials from Medify or other websites and videos that I myself have also used in my prep are very good and more than enough to actually prepare the UCAT. Like, you don't necessarily need to be part of an academy to get a good score. That's what I mean. Then I used Medify, which is an online question bank with more than 10,000 questions, 8 mocks, and 18 mini mocks. And what I really like about this resource is that there's a lot of questions. You can never really get bored. They have a countdown to your exam day, so you know exactly how many days you have left before your exam. They also tell you how many questions you've done each day, so you can actually track how hard you're working and how many questions you're practicing each day, and increase or decrease the amount of question depending on what scores you're getting in your mocks. Then they also give you in-depth solutions and explanation on each answer option for each question. So this allows you to understand exactly why some options were wrong and exactly why the correct answer was correct. Another thing that I really like about Medify is that they give you the percentage of people that chose the same answer choice as you have for that question, so it helps you gauge the difficulty of the question. Because if over 60%, for example, of people chose one answer option that was wrong and only 2% of people got the correct answer, it shows that this question was pretty difficult to get right. I also really like the fact that they give you a whole section about tutorials and helping you understand and giving you strategies and tips for basically acing the exam. What I also used that was extremely helpful was the Ucat websites, the official Ucat websites. They have question banks, they have mocks, and for these I did them a bit further in my preparation to keep like the official resource closer to my test date, so I was able to really understand and gauge the difficulty around the end of the exam, because I actually based the difficulty of each section on what I was feeling when I was doing the official questions. So this helped me understand, maybe in the middle of my prep, that the decision-making questions were actually harder on the official question bank than they were in Medify, or that the abstract reasoning questions were harder on Medify than they were on the official question banks, and things like that. Also, they have a mobile app, which is extremely helpful and extremely practical to practice on the go. I also used Ucat Ninja, which is a website made by Ali Abdal's company, 6med. It's an online question bank with more than 1,300 questions, with also 2 mocks available. Something that I also liked about this website was that, just like Medify, they give you the solutions for each answer and explain exactly why your answer was correct or wrong. I think that to have access to the solutions on this website, you need to pay, but they do have a bursary system in place. Another resource that I also used was the 1,250 Ucat practice questions made by the ISC Medical. And what I liked about this was that there's a lot of different questions. Just make sure that you don't use this resource as the first resource that you use to practice, because these questions are harder than the questions on Medify or the questions on the official question bank, as well as harder than what the actual Ucat exam will be like. So move on to this once you've already mastered all of the other resources. But it's a good resource because it also gives you more questions per passage, so you're able to go into a bit more depth. So the last resource that I used was the Good Medical Practice Guide made by the JMC, and I used this solely for the situational judgment part because it actually really helps you understand what a doctor should be doing and what a doctor shouldn't be doing. And so it helps you when you're doing the exam and when you're practicing to be able to class what you're reading as appropriate or inappropriate or very important or not important. And so that was pretty useful. So yeah, I'm done with the video. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe to my channel and share it with other people that could potentially benefit from it. Again, if you have any other questions, please leave a comment down below or contact me through DMs at Differently Moi. And also just stay tuned for other videos that will arrive your way on the BMAT, on the interview process, on the personal statement, and a lot of other videos that I'm preparing. Thank you for watching.